about that. So moving right along, we now have our keynote speaker, Dr. Lorraine Maxwell, and I want to make sure that she gets her full 45 minutes. So we're going to adjust times towards the end of the conference day. Dr. Lorraine Maxwell, she's an environmental psychologist and associate professor emerita in the Department of Design and Environmental Analysis at Cornell University. Her research focuses on the role of the physical environment in children's and adolescents' cognitive development, well-being, self-identity, and behavior. Her research looks closely at the physical environment of schools and early childhood facilities and its role in student outcomes and child development. She's also interested in the role of neighborhood design and quality in adolescent development. So we're very excited to have you here, Dr. Maxwell.
Thank you.
You have your 45 minutes.
All right, thank you. I will start my screen share and hope that all of this works well. Okay, can all of you see that fully? Joelle, am I doing this correctly?
So you're going to hit display settings and reverse it, because right now we see your speaker view.
Okay, that all right. Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for attending this conference today and for attending my keynote. Good morning to everyone. I am an environmental psychologist, and so I'm interested in how the physical environment affects all aspects of human behavior and development. And in particular, as Joelle says, my research has looked at children. Now, I recognize that this conference, that those of you who are attending are specifically concerned about pest management, but pest management is, of course, part of the general building condition. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how important the physical environment of schools is in terms of education and health issues, and the psychological processes related to learning, and how the building fits into and relates to those psychological processes. So we're going to have sort of an overview about those issues, and then I'll talk specifically about how building condition can affect students' perception of their learning environment and how that perception might affect their student outcomes, and specifically academic outcomes. So the work that all of you are doing, you already know that it's important, but indeed it fits into a larger scheme about the quality of the physical environment. Some of you may or may not have heard of Bronfenbrenner. Urie Bronfenbrenner was a professor at Cornell in the College of Human Ecology, which is my home college. He died a little over about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. But his work in terms of child development has influenced a lot of us who continue to do work in this area. Some of you may have heard old theories about, well, which is more important, the environment for children or their biology? In other words, what they bring to it. Is it the environment or the person? And what we like about Bronfenbrenner's theory is that he puts that one is no more important than the other, but they all contribute to child development. So he says that development, that D, is a function of the person, what they bring to the table, in other words. What he calls proximal processes, which are the daily activities that children are involved in. And those activities take place primarily in the home and the school. And in fact, children may spend more time in school, of course, not given COVID-19, but normally they spend more time in school. The context is both the social and the physical environment. So while I'm going to be talking about the building today, the physical school facility, and all of you are concerned about that too, we all know that the teachers and staff and parents and adults in children's lives, we know that they are important, but right now we're going to concentrate on the building. So he says, the context is the social and the physical environment, and then T stands for time. the children experiencing third grade in 1970, 1990, 2010, and now 2020 are experiencing, although third grade and although about 8 years old, are experiencing different things. And so he suggests that we take those things into, that we consider those things when we think about development. But for today, we're going to talk about the things that schools can control, which is mostly the proximal processes, meaning the daily activities that happen in school, and what we're most concerned with today, the physical context of the school building. So those are how it relates to educational outcomes. And then briefly, I'll also address health outcomes and how health outcomes can affect student absenteeism, which of course may relate to student educational outcomes. And then the physical environment also affects teacher absenteeism, and we all recognize this. First, however, let's look at the psychological processes that relate to learning. And I think you'll begin to see how these processes are related to the physical school building. Don't forget that I know that people are important in these things too, but we're concentrating on the building right now. So cognitive fatigue, that process is related to the inability to maintain sustained attention. And we'll probably test ourselves with that today. So you begin to deteriorate your ability to learn when you've had to concentrate really hard for a very long time, which is why at conferences we have breaks. We even will have one with this virtual conference where we can step away from our screens. But when we're physically in a place, usually sessions are 45 minutes, maybe an hour, hour and a half, because after that amount of time, people begin to lose the ability to continuously pay attention. This is, of course, true for children too. So we'll talk about how the build contributes to fatigue. And of course, when children are fatigued, they stop paying attention and learning deteriorates. Attention distraction, the ability to stay on task. We always talk about children, pay attention, pay attention. But how might the building, the physical environment, contribute to their ability not to pay attention? What's happening in the building? Motivation, the desire to learn, that affects all of us, adults and children. Why? Now, children are told to go to school, but once they're there, what will spark their interest? And the more highly motivated they are, and the building can contribute to motivation, as we'll see, the likelihood that they will learn better. Excuse me. And then emotional affect, one's attachment to the place. I will never forget, and I've been working in schools in New York State, but I will never name districts, but one focus group I held in a district in New York State, a child said to me, if the school looked better, maybe more kids would come to school all the time. And that really stuck with me. It's been a number of years ago when that child said that to me. That relates to emotional affect, how attached a child is to their school. I hope that all of us here have had good memories of our schools and how connected we felt to that building and to the people in the building. But okay, so first let's look at how the physical features of a building are related to cognitive fatigue. Remember, fatigue is you've been paying attention for a long time and you're just tired now. So complex environments, when there are many, many colors or many textures, or if you go into any elementary school classroom, lots and lots of displays can detract, if you will, from children being able to pay attention and contribute to cognitive fatigue. There's just too much to look at. There's a phrase of, going to the candy store and you don't know what to choose. That's what I'm talking about. Again, I've interviewed children and I've asked them about the kinds of displays that are in their classroom. And they will always say when the display relate to what they're learning then, not what it's now February and what they learned in September. But that helps them. They can look up if they're having a math lesson and they see an example on the board around them or a project that they did related to math. That helps to reduce cognitive fatigue. It helps to keep them involved. So the type and amount of displays in a classroom, too many colors, too many things going on. There's just too much to look at and pay attention to. So those kinds of things contribute to cognitive fatigue. Indoor air quality, of course. I'm sure you're all aware if it's too hot, if it's too cold, if the air circulation is poor. Of course, that's also related to issues of COVID-19. But even prior to COVID-19 and after, ventilation is important. Again, if people feel uncomfortable, then they're less likely to be able to pay attention, and children are no different. Lighting can also contribute to cognitive fatigue. If it's difficult, we're talking about natural lighting as well as electrical lights. So the amount of the light level will help children pay attention. If it's too bright, that contributes to cognitive fatigue, and just as well if it's too dark. Classroom layout also affects cognitive fatigue. The arrangement of the furniture, and I should say that that arrangement should support the lessons. So for example, when you want everybody to look at what's in front of them, the teacher, the speaker, it helps if people are in rows, right? So you're all facing forward. This is true in movie theaters, it's true in houses of worship, it's true in lecture halls. You want everybody to pay attention. Cluster arrangements of desks, and in any other situation as well, really helps if people are going to interact with each other. However, if the arrangement of the classroom is not supporting the kind of lesson that you're having, so for example, you want everyone to look at the person in front of the room, but you've arranged the chairs and the tables in the classroom in a way for students to look at each other, then they're going to be distracted, which relates to attention and contributes to cognitive fatigue. However, if the lesson that's happening where you want children to work together and you put them in rows, then that just makes it much more difficult, and they're going to start talking, and that will contribute to fatigue. So the classroom layout definitely affects cognitive fatigue. So moving forward now, and I'm hoping that I don't use all 45 minutes for this so that we can have some time for questions. So physical features related to attention and distraction. I've already touched on some of those, and you can see how attention and distraction and cognitive fatigue are related to each other. So features that relate to attention and distraction: acoustics or noise, density, crowding, classroom complexity, which I talked a little bit about just now, the layout of the classroom, and the building design itself. So effects of chronic exposure to noise. When I say chronic exposure to noise, we're not talking about intermittent noise every once in a while. A airplane goes overhead, or a train goes by, or a truck goes by. We're talking about school environments where there is constant noise. We're also talking about school environments that may have poor adjacency issues. And so there's a classroom next to the cafeteria or next to the band practice room, or there's a classroom in a very noisy corridor. All of these things can contribute to children experiencing chronic noise as opposed to acute noise. And from our research, we know that children's ability to pay attention greatly decreases when there's chronic noise, especially if they have a difficult task to do. If they have difficulty concentrating. And for young children, they're not able to tune out. As adults, and if there's some noise going on, we can try to put that aside and pay attention to what we have to do. Children, if they're chronically exposed to noise, haven't learned how to do that. And so they just tune out everything. They tune out the noise, but they also tune out the teacher, and they may tune out whatever is happening to the classroom. So we know that children exposed to chronic noise it has a negative effect on their ability to learn to read, especially. Okay, these aren't necessarily educational outcomes, but obviously something important. We also know that children chronically exposed to noise have a decreased tolerance for frustration. If you're frustrated, you're not going to learn very well. You just give up. We have found elevated blood pressure levels in children chronically exposed to noise, which can lead to problems in their adulthood. Increased reports of stress in children. They feel stressed. If they feel stressed, they're not going to learn well. And then increased mental and voice fatigue in teachers if they have to constantly keep their voice up. I would say that schools have experimented with carpeting, but carpeting introduces other issues related to indoor air quality and other kinds of things. So there's a balance of this. But if teachers are fatigued, they're not teaching as well, and of course that will then affect student outcomes. So all of these things are related. So what are some sources? And this will depend on the school district where you are. Some school districts do not experience any of these things in terms of the external sources, but almost every school district will have some internal sources that they need to pay attention to. The external sources, airport traffic, that mostly occurs in larger environments or depending on where your school is located, road traffic and train traffic. Now you may say, well, why would you build a school near an airport? This usually doesn't happen on purpose. Often the flight patterns may change, or the airport may put in a new runway, and all of a sudden nearby schools and their homes, because if a child is in elementary school and they're experiencing chronic noise in the school, most likely since elementary schools, children live nearby, they're also experiencing chronic noise when they're at home. Internal sources of noise, mechanical systems. What noise is that generating in the classroom? This low level kind of noise, and we've all experienced that. Lighting can contribute to noise. Furniture being moved around, which would, again, distract children, and some children are more easily distracted than others. Building design, by that I mean adjacencies. Where do you place the classrooms in the building? Where do you place the cafeteria? I did some work in a child care center once where they located the infant sleeping room next to the cafeteria. The teachers were then, the school was then not able to use the cafeteria because the noise generated there interfered with the infants. And so again, building design affects all of these things. Okay, another feature related to attention and distraction is density and crowding. These are not necessarily the same thing, but they are related. Density is an objective measure, how many people in a space, how much square footage is allotted to each person in that space. Crowding is a response to the density. Some people may feel crowded in a specific situation. The same situation, someone else may not feel crowded. So we don't want to confuse those terms. We feel crowded when we can't control our interactions with other people. So if you feel you're constantly being interrupted because of the number of other people in the space, that can contribute to cognitive fatigue or attention overload. And of course, density, the objective measure of that, will contribute to the number of people in a space. But some people may feel more difficulty controlling their ability to interact with other people. We know that crowding and density, density, I should say right now, is also related to COVID-19 issues for health reasons. So the number of people in a space and the amount of square footage in a space is really important. I'm talking today about how children learn, but we know it also has health issues. So school size in terms of density issues. The research has shown that smaller schools tend to promote more pro-social behaviors. That's because there's fewer people. And so each person in that situation may have to take on more leadership roles or more responsibility, and so they're more likely to work together. You may know that if you're in a very large organization and you don't really want to be on the leadership council, you can just sort of lay back and just be a member. However, if it's a very small organization, everybody has to play a very responsible role. And that's what we're talking about in terms of school size. We see fewer acts of violence per student just because there's fewer people around. Academic achievement. Now, some small schools, there are benefits, but there's conflicting evidence in terms of achievement because sometimes smaller schools don't have the budget to provide the kinds of resources and spaces. So there are some drawbacks to having very small schools. Classrooms, in terms of density, we definitely see a negative effect on learning when density is high, meaning a large number of students or square footage per child is reduced. It's a negative effect on behavior. Boys tend to be more negatively affected in crowded classrooms in terms of behavior. And this will draw the teacher's attention more to reining in their behavior and thereby neglecting the girls in the classroom. Some research has shown that. And so girls then, while they may not be as demonstrating their discomfort with the density in the classroom, they are also suffering higher levels of distraction, just more people around, so there's more things to pay attention to, which contributes to cognitive fatigue and less pro-social behavior. This is not written in stone, but these are some of the things that can happen in crowded classrooms or high density classrooms. So just again, to reiterate this point, when I'm talking about class size, I'm talking about group size, the number of people in a space. I have these stars here because this is also now related to COVID-19. But we see increased academic achievement for class sizes with less than 17 children. This is in elementary school. So COVID-19 and the class sizes that we have to maintain now may shed some additional light on these issues. What it means, however, is that more classrooms have to be built, and so that's another whole issue. And when I say class size, square footage per child is a different issue. You can have 15 children in a classroom and each child has 20 square feet per child, or you can have 15 children in a classroom and every child only has 10 square feet per child. So you have the same number of children, but you have a different square footage. Okay, let's move to motivation. How does the physical features of a school relate to motivation? That child I told you about at the beginning, where that child talked about if the school looked better, more people would come to school. So he had a very good understanding of how the physical environment is contributing to motivating students to want to be there. Some specific things we can look at is control, the ability to manipulate the environment. Do children feel, and teachers as well, can teachers actually arrange their classroom to do the kinds of things they want to do? Can they make materials available so that children can get them themselves, as opposed to always having to hand things out, because that then children have some sense of their participation in the classroom. So they're more highly motivated to participate. Access issues is not just ADA, but because of course all schools have to pay very close attention to those issues. But I'm also talking about adjacency issues. How close are and some of this is defined by code, but how close are the restrooms to where students need to have them? Talking about also the height of door handles, the heaviness of a door. Do children feel comfortable being in a space? And you'll see this later, the more comfortable children feel in a space, the more highly motivated they are that this is my space. And especially for younger children, but also in high school, Does the physical facility allow them the opportunity to explore different kinds of materials? Is the classroom large enough to do these kinds of things? I have a very fond memory of my own elementary school education. We were building we had walked around our neighborhood, and then we were going to create a scale model of our neighborhood. So we were learning about street patterns and the kinds of stores and about the city. And so we had a large enough classroom to actually create a scale model of a particular neighborhood around our school. And I still remember that in shop, the things that I built to contribute to that. So again, I must have been obviously highly motivated to participate and to still remember that as an adult. Emotional affect is related to motivation, obviously. So how good do we feel about being in school? I'm sad to say that one of the schools that I was conducting research in, I was conducting a focus group with schoolers, trying to get their understanding of how the physical environment was affecting them. And we were in the teacher's lounge conducting this focus group after school. And while we were talking, a mouse ran through the space. Okay, so this might relate to some of what you are concerned with. The girls jumped up on their desk. I and my assistant, we remained relatively calm. If it had been a rat, I would have been out the door, but it was a mouse, and the boys were sort of freaked out too. And I said, the mouse seeing us, ran back in its hole. But I asked the students, had this ever happened before? And they said, it happens all the time, even in the cafeteria. So this is building maintenance issues. Children cannot possibly feel good about being in a place where those kinds of things happen a lot. So when I'm talking about emotional affect, I'm talking about the academic climate. Do children respect each other? Do teachers respect students, vice versa? Do they feel as if the academic climate is encouraging them always to go to the next level? And there are physical features that can relate to this academic climate. Building maintenance being one of them. How well is the building maintained? Do kids feel good? Do teachers feel good about being in that school building? Also, research has shown that space for personalization can affect how attached a child feels to the school and to the academic climate. Again, we looked at a study in an elementary school where several classrooms only had commercial things up on the boards. Well, all of the classrooms had that at the beginning. Then after a certain time, half of the classrooms were given the opportunity to personalize the space with things that the children wanted to put up. And the other classrooms kept the commercial materials. And we found that at the end of that study, that the children where there was more personalization had higher scores on self-esteem. So this can also then obviously contribute to their emotional affect and hopefully to better academic outcomes. So I could stop here briefly and ask there any questions, Joelle, or should I continue and then go later? Questions later.
I would keep going at this point. Nothing has shown up in the chat.
Okay, fine. Okay, so physical features of the school building related to student and teacher health outcomes. Obviously, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, cooling system, the HVAC system is going to contribute to health outcomes. In particular, we know now ventilation issues are related to COVID-19, but these issues are always important. So not only does ventilation and heating and cooling relate to those academic outcomes that I talked about, but they contribute to health outcomes. Teachers, staff, students who may have asthma or different things. Obviously, pest management issues are related to asthma in terms of controlling any asthma triggers, but the HVAC system is also important. Maintenance, again, that's what many of you are concerned with, in maintaining a clean environment. And also, for the students' sake, a visually clean space, that the bathrooms are clean, that the corridors are clean, that the classroom is clean, that they don't see watermarks in the ceiling. So these are the kinds of things that students will notice, and they pay attention to these things. But it also contributes, obviously, to health outcomes. Class size and crowding can contribute to health outcomes, especially now we're talking about that. And acoustics will contribute to health outcomes in terms of hearing loss, potentially. So, okay, so how does building condition relate to student perception and therefore student outcomes? So, and I will identify this school district, New York City. I looked at all of the middle schools in New York City to look at how school building quality might be related to academic achievement. Now, we already know in my field that school building quality is affecting academic outcomes, that the better the school building itself, we tend to see higher achievement scores in better maintained and better designed school buildings. So the work that all of you are doing is really very critical. But we have also found that school building quality seems to be related to student attendance. Why might that be? Well, there might be health issues, there might be motivation issues, and this was across, it wasn't just occurring in low-income areas, but across income groups. So my question was, why would school building quality, I know it's affecting attendance, and if children aren't attending, then outcomes are obviously going to be affected. Why is that happening? I'm thinking, why would school building quality be related to attendance and therefore achievement? So I decided to look at the social climate of the academic climate. Are students always encouraged to go to the next level? Are they encouraged to respect each other? Are they encouraged to participate in the school? Do teachers feel that everyone respects? So that's the academic climate. So I decided to look at how school building quality, the physical building, is related to the academic climate or the social climate. If the social climate is poor, then attendance may go down, and if attendance goes down, then achievement will go down. And so that's what I did. We know that this happens in elementary school, that school building quality predicted academic performance and student lateness. Student perception of the building quality also predicted academic performance. So, and I should tell you that in these studies, student perception of building quality mirrored, we also asked the building superintendents with the same measures to rate their school building quality. And the schools where the students thought the building quality was poor were the same buildings that the adults, the building superintendents, thought the building quality was poor. So it wasn't just student perception. They were seeing the building for what it is. Perceived classroom quality was also a good predictor of scholastic competency and children's self-worth. Again, I've just talked about this, that school building quality predicts academic performance. Perception of school building quality predicts academic performance. So the quality really is important, and students are seeing the building for what it is. So in New York City, I looked at all of the middle schools. So this was 236 middle schools in New York City. And what I wanted to see was how was building quality, that's building 2, related to students' perception of the academic and social climate, and how did that relate to attendance, and then how did that affect test scores? Now you also see free lunch there, and per BH, those refer to the number of children in a particular school receiving free and reduced price meals. That gives me an indication of the income level of parents, children in that school, and the percentage of Black and Hispanic students in a particular school building. We know that those two factors, low income issues and percentage of minority students, is related to attendance, and we also know it's related to test scores. However, what I wanted to see was how were those things, how was building quality also related to those things? Building quality was assessed not by me, but by engineers and architects who do a regular evaluation, not those employed by the school district, but outside contractors. And these are the kinds of things that they rate. And then the Learning Quality Survey, which is what New York City gives to all of its students in middle school, high school, their parents, and the teachers. They all rate their school building on these issues. So academic expectations, are there high expectations? Communications, how well do people communicate with each other in a building? Engagement, how engaged are teachers, students, and parents? Safety issues, that especially related to maintenance of the building. And respect, do all of the players in the school environment respect each other? So every school building in New York City is all the students and students and teachers have a very high rate of return in giving this survey back every year. Parents, it will depend. So I looked at how students' perception of their social learning environment is shaped by the physical quality of their building. And what I found was that in the buildings that had poor, based on that rating scale that I showed you of all those factors that engineers and architects rate a school building. So I had a score for every school building. And the schools that scored lower on building quality also scored lower on that building quality, that environmental quality, that social climate, also scored lower. By the way, the schools with that had a higher percentage of low-income families or minority families, they did not necessarily perceive their school environment as poor, except when the building quality was poor. So what we found was, well, I'll back up a second. What we found was that while demographic factors such as income of families and minority status of the students contributed to student outcomes, that the physical environment contributed a distinct and specific contribution to student outcomes. That in spite of, and unfortunately, we found that there were more poor quality buildings in neighborhoods with low-income students and a higher percentage of minority students. So we have a sort of a social justice issue here. But when building quality was high, in the few instances that we found, then those students also had a better perception of their academic climate. Their attendance was better, and then their student outcomes were better. So in conclusion, yes, indeed, I know all of you know this, but I hope that this has helped to put in context the larger issue of school building quality and how the physical environment matters to the children especially, but obviously also to the teachers as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. I really appreciate that. You make an incredibly compelling case for how the building quality really does impact students and those academic outcomes. I'm curious if you have seen any successful strategies that you've made this case, people get it, and now they want to improve their school building quality. Do you have any recommendations or stories that you can tell us?
Okay. Yeah, I sometimes, by the way, the attendees at this conference don't know that I've also, when I first came to Cornell, I worked with Cooperative Extension and went out to various counties working primarily with early childhood teachers. So And I've given workshops related to their environments and a little bit also with elementary schools. So I suppose I've worked at the level of the teachers in the classroom. I've talked with them about things like the complexity of the classroom, telling them what students have told me, that when the displays relate to what they're learning, oddly enough, the teachers sometimes will say, but my principal says that when parents come, they want to see lots of stuff on the walls. But then we go but then I remember specifically one kindergarten teacher. She had so many things, and the kids were running all over the place. And I suggested that she reduce the number of toys in the space, that she reduce the number of cartoon characters on the walls and things, and only hang up children's artwork and a few other perhaps displays. And when I came back a few months later, she said it worked. That things were calmer in the classroom, and that she had arranged the space such that children didn't bump into each other all the time. So that's a density issue, a crowding issue. So I have worked with classroom teachers on things they can do in their classroom. In that school that I told you about where we saw the mouse come into the teacher's lounge, I related that to a teacher after I finished with my focus group. And they said that that had been a persistent problem of dealing with pests in their school. And they felt that it was contributing to the academic climate in their school, and that it was an ongoing issue. So the things that you folks are doing is, obviously you already know it's important, but I've been looking at it from a slightly different way, and it really is important. And teachers feel very frustrated. They say it's not our job to do this, but it's contributing to how they feel about coming to do their job every day, and about how students feel in terms of coming to school every day. Not sure if that answered your question, Joelle, but.
Well, that certainly does help. So, and what I think I heard you say is that you've worked on a classroom by classroom basis, but not
Yes.
an entire school building.
Right.
But it is good to hear that even when you just hit one small space, we can really make a difference.
Yes. And I think it's been especially helpful for the teachers that I've engaged with to, because they know that the curriculum is important. They know that what they do is important, but tying that physical environment to these specific things of attention. It's not just them yelling, pay attention. It's the physical environment that is contributing to whether or not children are paying attention. And also students beginning to understand that it's not necessarily their fault if they can't hear. That it's something happening in the physical environment. And so if you feel that I'm doing everything I can, it must be me. Whereas if you begin to understand that there are other factors, this also relates to how well you can learn.
Well, this is Claire. That's so wonderful to hear. We, organizationally, Healthy Schools Network, endorsed the New York State Governor's Plan put together by the Department of Health and the Education Department that all public and private schools have to have written policies and plans on a whole variety of things. It's as close as you can get to what we had originally called for in the spring and then in July in a big national report for schools to have infection prevention and control plans. They're not required to have these things. Sort of
Wow.
in the middle of a pandemic is the wrong time to figure out you don't have to control infections in a school, and the wrong time to figure out you don't have a public health system for kids.
Yeah, I'm actually very surprised. Wow. I saw
this is great. We're going to move on, but we can definitely continue this
We'll definitely continue.
discussion.
I saw a question in the chat, Joelle.
I'm sorry?
I saw a question in the chat. Have I done this type of presentation to facility? I have done this presentation in New York State to the School Boards Association. I belong to a national organization of school facilities people, and they have a New York State chapter. I've given this kind of presentation several times to that group, both in New York State and their national conferences. I haven't, and of course I published on this, but I haven't given this particular presentation in a couple of years in New York State. This is my first time in a few years.
Okay.
What facility group is that?
It was called the Council of Educational Facility Planners.
Oh, SFP.
Yeah. Now
Oh,
it's
okay.
the Association for Learning Environments.
Yeah.
I was the regional president 1 year, so I've been involved with them, yes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
We do have to reconnect after this.
Yes, Claire. Good to see you.